The next day was Saturday, and Martha slept off her pain pills till almost noon. When she finally woke up, she was in Connor's old room, and there was a loud chorus of coughing and hammering coming from the side of the house. She dragged herself to the window. Connor smiled in at her from atop a ladder and stuffed a handkerchief back into his pocket. "Uh-oh, it's alive!" "Very funny, Connor. What time is it?" "Late. You almost slept the day away. How's your arm?" Martha frowned down at her cast, but she wasn't thinking about her broken bones. "I almost slept the day away, and now it's almost tomorrow. Almost Halloween." "Martha," Connor asked softly, "what are you doing up here anyway?" Martha groaned. "Don't you have any respect for the injured? I promised your dad I'd have these shutters fixed before he got home." And he broke off abruptly, sneezed, and then glanced back over his shoulder. "What is it, besides the fact that you're spraying me with cold germs?" "I think we have a visitor." "Who?" "I think it's Win." "You're kidding." From where she stood, Martha couldn't see anything, only Connor waving at someone and telling them to go inside. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Martha started downstairs and saw Win step hesitantly into the lower hall. As Martha stood there watching, her heart ached within her. Win looked absolutely terrified. "Win," Martha called softly. The girl jumped, her face paling slightly. "Martha, I heard what happened last night. I feel so awful about it." "Don't," Martha brandished her cast and winced. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I shouldn't have left you. I shouldn't have gone in." Martha smiled grimly. "I'm gonna look great for the party tomorrow night. Come on up. You're just in time to help me wrestle into my clothes." Win nodded and started up, her hand gripped white on the banister, her eyes darting nervously below them. The front door opened and Connor stood quietly watching. As Win reached the landing, she stared in silence at the doorways, at the servants' hall, and then without a word, she headed straight for the back bedroom. Martha caught her gently by the arm. "Not there. I'm in this room now." "This one?" Win's face registered slow surprise. "Oh, I'm just so used to going to Elizabeth's room. I did have that room, but I just feel too weird about it. So Connor's trading with me. I still have to move my stuff in here, though." Win nodded and followed her inside, her eyes roving over Connor's sparse assortment of belongings as Martha gathered up some clothes. "So," Martha said with forced cheerfulness, "how did you get out here anyway?" "I borrowed Greg's car." "How did you manage that?" "He doesn't know about it yet." Martha laughed. "Have you had lunch? I feel really hungry today, but the way Connor's been coughing around here, he'll probably give me his cold and—" Win wasn't listening, her gaze sweeping the hall beyond the door. Martha watched her sadly and sighed. "Win, really, I can't stand this. It must be so hard for you to come back in here, to remember. If you want to leave, I'll understand." "No," the admittance of her tone surprised Martha, and Win looked back at her, unflinching. "No, this is something I have to do. If I don't get all this figured out, I'll have to spend my whole life with a blank page in my mind." She took a step forward, her eyes wide and solemn. "Martha, yesterday you asked me what I thought happened to Dennis. Why? Why did you ask me that?" For a long moment, Martha couldn't even speak. Win's eyes held her in a restless stare, and though her lips parted, no answer formed. When Connor spoke from the doorway, they both startled. "What are the chances," Connor asked casually, "of Dennis still being alive?" At first, Martha thought Win might faint. Her face strained the last of its color, and she groped out blindly for Martha's hand. Martha sat her down on the edge of the bed and motioned for Connor to raise the window. Alive?" Win murmured. "Yes." Connor knelt before her, his voice urgent but kind. "They never found him. They never proved anything. It's possible, isn't it, Win? That if he was crazy enough to kill Elizabeth, that he could still be out there, thinking somehow that she is still alive?" Martha collapsed in a chair. He said it. After all these days of fear and confusion, the questions, the terror, thinking all along that maybe it was her, that she was the crazy one. Connor had finally come out and said it. She looked at him and her eyes blurred, but he had a hold of Win's hands and didn't see her. "Win," he said again softly, "it is possible, isn't it?" Win looked confused and then shook her head sorrowfully. "I'd know if Dennis were back. I'd know about it." "How?" Connor persisted. "How would you know?" She stopped, took a deep breath, squared her shoulders. "I think he tried to contact me somehow, to find out what happened, to see if it was safe. He always talked to me about Elizabeth because he knew how close we were, and he didn't kill her. I know he didn't. But how do you know that? Connor squeezed her hands. How can you be sure? He threatened her, and he just didn't want her going out with Blake, that's all. Any more than Blake wanting her going back to him. It just really infuriated him that Blake had her now. They'd always been such rivals, girls and basketball and honors and scholarships. She shook her head, pressing her hands to her temples. So Dennis was pretty possessive of Elizabeth? Wynn gave a reluctant nod and had a bad temper. A pause, another nod. So they could have had an argument. He could have lost his head and done something violent. Wynn looked miserably at the floor. I guess so. But couldn't anyone have done that? I mean, couldn't he have found out she had been killed and then killed himself? Or couldn't it have been a coincidence that his car went off the bridge and he died? Or couldn't the same person who killed Elizabeth have killed him too? Connor and Martha exchanged looks. Wynn, Martha said gently, anything is possible, but those are pretty far-fetched. Not any more far-fetched than calling Dennis a murderer. Wynn's voice was desperate now, and she met Connor's eyes at last. Don't you see I have to try to remember for Dennis's sake? After all the doctors I went to trying to jar my memory, and then I figured this house was out of my life forever, and I'd never remember again. But then you came here, and Martha's so much like Elizabeth, and now the house is back in my life again, and it's all so strange and scary, like this was meant to be. Like Elizabeth and Dennis did this on purpose because they want me to help them prove what really happened. She trailed off, looking pleadingly into Connor's eyes. It sounds so silly. No, Connor released her hands, a reassuring smile at the corners of his lips. Reassuring and worried, Martha thought. He looked so tired. No, it isn't silly, Connor said again. We'll help you. The gratitude on Wynn's face was heartrending. Connor stood and ran one hand absently through his hair. I'll make us lunch. We can talk some more downstairs.